The House of Grimaldi, originating in 12th century Genoa, etched its name in history by seizing Monaco in 1297 under Francesco il Malizia. With a fortune estimated at $1 billion, Forbes 2021, they built an empire through trade, real estate, and Monte Carlo's iconic casino. From feudal lords to princes since 1659, the Grimaldis navigated French and Spanish influence, with figures like Rainier III and Albert II shaping modern Monaco. The 1956 marriage of Rainier III to Grace Kelly catapulted Monaco into global fame. Yet, beyond cultural contributions, like the Oceanographic Museum, the dynasty is shrouded in secrets, illegitimate heirs, financial scandals, and whispers of curses, evoking the intrigues of the Borgias or Romanovs. Unlike the dissipated wealth of the Goulds, the Grimaldis' influence endures through real estate and philanthropy, rivaling the Grosvenors' longevity. Uncover the enigma of the Grimaldi dynasty, a saga where power, wealth, and mystique intertwine. From new money to old money, imagine the hush of a late autumn Mediterranean night in 1297. Moonlight paints the limestone ramparts of a lonely fortress that most of Europe barely knows exists. From the shadow of a pine, a thin line of figures in coarse brown habits glides toward the gate. At their head is Francesco Grimaldi, a Genoese merchant adventurer whose grin is half mischief, half destiny. He and his companions look every inch the humble friars they're pretending to be, until the final torch sputters out, steel flashes in the dark, and the monks become swordsmen. Within minutes the guards are disarmed, the drawbridge is theirs, and a red and white flag flaps over what history will remember simply as the Rock. That moonlit coup is the first page of a saga that will stretch across 7 centuries, pivot from raw trade to refined rule, and ultimately prove that audacity, if carefully reinvested, can mature into the rarest of currencies, enduring legitimacy. To grasp how a handful of Genoese traders turned their beachhead into the planet's most famous postage stamp state, rewind to the forces that shaped Francesco's world. Genoa in the late 13th century was an ocean-going startup hub. Its docks thundered with the clatter of wine casks and the cries of silk brokers. Its ledger books tracked profits from North African spices to Baltic amber. Francesco wasn't born into old estates or hereditary offices. He was carved from the same grain of commerce that propelled Mary Brickell to drain Florida swampland into Miami skyscraper gold 500 years later. Risk was the family business, and the fortress above Monaco's harbor looked like the perfect venture, well-positioned, lightly defended, capable of transforming a trader into a lord if fortune favored the bold. It did, but conquest alone doesn't age well. It needs polish or it rusts. Enter the 17th century, by which time the Grimaldis have weathered sieges, forged alliances, and learned that in Europe, titles can outshine towers. In 1612, Honoré II persuades every court that matters to address him as Serene Prince of Monaco. Think of it as the era's most exquisite rebrand, a single line of calligraphy that upgrades a hilltop fief into a sovereign principality. Suddenly, the Grimaldis occupy the same diplomatic reception rooms as the Habsburg emperors, and ambassadors bend the knee not to wealthy merchants, but to reigning royalty. Honoré's new title does exactly what a blue checkmark does for an influencer today. It signals authenticity, authority, and access to circles that money alone can't crack. Titles, though, are time-stamped. Culture is timeless. That truth hits home with Albert I, the navigating prince, who inhales salt air the way industrialists inhale share prices. He steers research vessels into uncharted Atlantic trenches, collects whale skeletons the length of boxcars, then funds artisans to frame the bones in crystal-walled galleries. The result, the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco, rises from the cliff like a limestone galleon. Walk inside and you stride directly into Albert's thesis that exploration and education are the twin screws of progress. When Rainier III inherits the throne decades later, he picks up that conviction and toggles the dial from science to art. He commissions sculptors, bankrolls avant-garde ballets, and transforms sun-kissed squares into impromptu galleries where marble torsos share space with experimental jazz. Visitors leaving those events whisper the same verdict critics once reserved for New York's Whitney family. Patronage, when done right, can be a cultural centrifuge, spinning raw capital into global influence. Bloodlines matter too, particularly in the 18th century, when Europe's balance of power is calibrated by marriage certificates. In 1715, Jacques Goyon de Matignon, scion of Norman aristocrats who trace their banners back to William the Conqueror, weds Louise Hippolyte Grimaldi, Monaco's sole hereditary princess. Picture Aristotle Onassis locking arms with Athena Livanos, two dynasties, one strategic handshake, and enough pedigree to silence any genealogist poking for weak links. The union not only injects French blue blood into Genoese veins, it also tethers Monaco diplomatically to Versailles at a time when Louis XIV's shadow still blankets half the continent. For the Grimaldis, it's like swapping a private yacht for an aircraft carrier overnight. While matrimony fortifies lineage, money must fuel the engine. Cue the mid-19th century, an era of wrist-watching industrialists and silk-gloved duchesses hunting entertainment more intoxicating than another waltz in Vienna. Entrepreneurs Francois Blanc and his wife Marie hit upon an idea. Build a fantasy palace of mirrors, marble, and roulette wheels on a rocky promontory. Call it the Monte Carlo Casino, and turn chance into spectacle. The Société des Bains de Mer, the corporate shell anchoring the venture, doesn't just host gamblers, it manufactures an entire lifestyle. On any given night, chandeliers worth a minor dukedom sparkle above tuxedoed bankers, while violinists thread suspense between each spin of the wheel. The house edge, modest but relentless, funnels rivers of gold into state coffers, underwriting boulevards, schools, and later a concert hall whose acoustic engineers make violas ring like crystals. Add Monaco's zero income tax policy, and the principality becomes the fiscal equivalent of a Mediterranean breeze, warm, welcoming, and refreshingly light on obligations. Leap forward again, and the benefits of that policy manifest in steel, glass, and marble. The Prince's Palace, perched like a Renaissance diorama above the harbor, anchors a real estate portfolio that stretches from Belle Epoque apartments overlooking La Condamine to slender modern towers whose penthouses let residents wave at helicopter pilots. Every square meter within the city-state's 2 square kilometer footprint is measured in carats rather than square feet. Foreign investors who once stored bullion in Swiss vaults now park their capital in sea view balconies and climate-controlled wine cellars carved into hillside foundations. Where the Vanderbilts splurged on marble fantasies only to watch maintenance bills devour inheritance, the Grimaldis cycle casino dividends into high-rise facades, marina expansions, and fiber-optic cabling that lets traders place London orders before their espresso cools. Business diversification is the dynasty's unsung superpower. The Société des Bains de Mer, still the family's crown jewel, has evolved from a gambling concession into a multi-sector conglomerate. It owns the Grand Théâtre de Monte Carlo, a Belle Epoque opera house whose red velvet tiers have hosted tenors from Caruso to Kaufmann, and operates beach clubs where DJs fade sunset into starlight. Five-star hotels like the Hotel de Paris Monte Carlo serve truffle risotto to hedge fund founders fresh off the heliport, while spas pamper Formula One mechanics exhausted by 90 laps of adrenaline. The company's public listing spreads risk and invites shareholder scrutiny, ensuring that even princes must answer to quarterly reports, a governance guardrail that many old world dynasties wish they'd installed before their trust funds hit the reef. Philanthropy isn't the frosting on this cake, it's baked into the batter. Albert I's Oceanographic Museum still inspires awe, but the Grimaldis have long since widened their charitable aperture. The Prince Albert II Foundation channels millions into polar ice core analysis, coral reef nurseries, and renewable energy incubators from California to Kenya. It grants bankroll graphene solar cells, sponsors youth oceanography camps, and convenes climate summits where marine biologists debate policy with shipping magnates. This isn't image polishing, it's strategic reinforcement. A message that the rock may be small, but its ambitions are planetary. The approach borrows from Andrew Mellon's playbook: endow institutions with missions that outlive any single CEO, or, in this case, prince, and watch the dividends accrue in public goodwill. Cultural currency flows from a different vault, one lined with reels of Technicolor nostalgia. When Hollywood icon Grace Kelly crossed the palace threshold in 1956 as Princess Grace, she carried the glamour of Hitchcock close-ups and Oscar podiums into every corridor. Newsreels of the wedding reached more living rooms than any European royal event before it, planting Monaco's coat of arms on the global imagination. Her effortless blend of American modernity and European grace rewrote the script of monarchy for the television age, proving that soft power could travel on celluloid just as effectively as on coronation coaches. Decades later, film schools still screen Rear Window and To Catch a Thief, and every frame doubles as a postcard that reads, "Wish you were in Monaco." Albert II's hidden illegitimate children. Prince Albert II, the only son of Hollywood legend Grace Kelly and Monaco's iron-willed Prince Rainier III, spent the first half of his adult life wrapped in the glitter of Europe's most eligible bachelor. Magazine covers framed him beside supermodels and Olympians, gossip columns tracked his every yacht hop, and tourist brochures sold the fantasy that the principality's ruler-to-be was still romantically available. Casinos minted chips stamped with his carefree grin, while hotel concierges whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, a dazzling guest might one day become Princess of Monaco. The palace leaned hard into that narrative because it was perfect for business. Investors adored a glamorous court, and visitors flocked to a fairy tale kingdom seemingly paused mid-proposal. Children, especially secret children, had no place in that picture, but the real world rarely consults a royal press office. Quietly, far from paparazzi flash, Albert became a father twice. In 1992, a daughter arrived, bright-eyed Jasmine Grace Grimaldi, born after Albert's summer romance with an American waitress turned aspiring actress. 13 years later, in 2003, a son followed. Curly-haired Alexandra Grimaldi, Coste, the child of Nicole Coste, a Togolese-born Air France flight attendant whose elegance caught Albert's eye somewhere between Paris and Nice. 2 babies, 2 secret universes, and, for more than a decade, 2 meticulous campaigns of hush designed to protect the bachelor brand that kept Monaco's tourism machine humming. Yasmin grew up in California's sunshine, seeing Monaco only in storybooks and glossy magazine spreads. Her mother told her early that her father was royal, but the knowledge came with strict instructions. Share the secret with no one wait patiently for official recognition, and in the meantime, build a bright life of your own. Yasmin poured herself into school musicals, honed a Broadway clear singing voice, and devoured tales of Princess Grace, her ethereal grandmother frozen in time on film reels. She wore her invisible tiara lightly, cracking jokes with friends who never guessed her middle name matched the world's most famous princess. Every birthday, however, carried the weight of a clandestine letter or a lawyer-routed phone call, delicate reminders that Monaco had not forgotten her, yet was not ready to claim her. Alexandra's early years unfolded differently, but were every bit as complicated. Nicole Coste settled in Paris after leaving the skies, creating a cozy middle-class cocoon for her son. She enrolled him in bilingual schools, shielded him from tabloid lenses, and once a month whisked him to discreet father-son rendezvous. Friends of the prince recalled Albert's obvious affection, ski weekends in the Alps, quiet afternoons aboard a family yacht, yet each moment concluded with firm instructions that the visits must remain private. Nicole's patience frayed as rumors multiplied. Overlapping gossip columns pointed out the toddler's uncanny resemblance to the prince. Lawyers redrafted confidentiality agreements thicker than a Monaco phone book. Wire transfers crossed borders. Questions piled higher. Everything shifted in April 2005 when Prince Rainier III died and Albert inherited the throne. Overnight, the world's most carefree bachelor became a reigning monarch, the sovereign prince of Monaco, subject to constitutional scrutiny stronger than flashbulbs. European governments, wary of instability in a crucial banking hub, quietly asked, did Monaco's new ruler possess a legitimate heir? Inside the Pink Palace, courtiers huddled over genealogical charts. If Albert remained childless when he eventually wed, succession would pass to his sister Princess Caroline or her eldest son Andrea. That uncertainty spooked investors and fanned political whispers. The bachelor myth, once useful, now threatened to turn into a liability, especially if concealed children surfaced on their own timetable. That exact scenario erupted 6 weeks into Albert's reign. In May 2005, Paris Match splashed a photo of 2-year-old Alexandre across its cover, proclaiming him le fils caché du prince, the prince's hidden son. The palace issued no outright denial. Instead, courtiers huddled behind frosted glass and promised that private matters would be addressed. DNA tests were ordered, lawyers dueled in hushed chambers, and settlement drafts multiplied. By the end of June, the palace released a crisp communiqué. Prince Albert II acknowledged paternity of Alexandre Grimaldi Coste. Because the child was born out of wedlock, the statement clarified he would not enter the line of succession. With that footnote, Monaco's bachelor fantasy lost its first crucial pillar. 11 months later, the second secret collapsed. In June 2006, 13-year-old Yasmin traveled quietly to Monaco for her own DNA confirmation. Princess Antoinette's secret coup attempt. The year is 1950, and fog from the Ligurian Sea drifts through Monaco's narrow streets as the principality braces for the end of Prince Louis II's long reign. In salons, everyone keeps one eye on the palace and one ear tuned to gossip, because a succession crisis sits coiled like a spring behind the palace's rose-colored facade. The heir apparent, 26-year-old Rainier, busies himself in Paris nightclubs and military reviews, certain his destiny is secure. But upstairs, in a suite that once belonged to their mother, his older sister, Princess Antoinette, moves chess pieces the rest of the family cannot yet see. Antoinette has always been quick to sense an opening. As a child, she discovered hidden passages, memorized servant schedules, and mastered the exact angle required to peer from her balcony into the throne room without being spotted. Back then, she believed the crown might one day sit on her own dark curls, because Louis II had produced no legitimate sons. The illusion shattered when a tutor explained Monaco's rule of male primogeniture. The first boy in the line, however late he arrived, would leap straight over her. That boy turned out to be Rainier. Overnight, the title she imagined as hers became something she could only watch across the dinner table. Resentment burrowed deep. During her 20s, Antoinette learned to camouflage that resentment beneath flawless court manners, cutting ribbons, hosting charity raffles, dazzling foreign envoys with quips in flawless French, Italian, and English. Yet every magazine photograph of handsome Prince Rainier sharpened the sting. To outsiders, she played the dutiful royal daughter. In private, she kept a ledger of every slight and every constitutional loophole. One evening at a polo match in Cap d'Ale, the princess meets Alexandre Athanase Nogues, a French Corsican race car driver and tennis star who smells of motor oil and sea salt. He is no aristocrat, which makes him deliciously free of diplomatic baggage. His teasing grin draws a laugh from Antoinette that startles even her. Court life rarely earns genuine laughter. Within weeks, they become lovers, slipping away to secluded coves and alpine chalets far from the photographers who circle Monte Carlo. By summer's end, their first child, Elizabeth Anne, is on the way. The palace tries to smother talk of the pregnancy, but Monaco is the size of a postage stamp. Secrets echo along every corridor. Antoinette's second child, Christian Louis, follows 2 years later, and a third, Christine Alix, will arrive in early 1951. All three are born outside wedlock, and that fact both threatens and fuels Antoinette's plan. If she can marry Alexandre before the old prince dies, her children can be legitimized retroactively under both Monegasque and French law, thrusting them directly into the succession line ahead of Rainier. Legitimization, after a later marriage, has precedent in Monaco's Civil Code of 1882, whose language remains pliable enough to serve her purpose. Antoinette and Alexandre seek discreet opinions from friendly notaries in Nice and Paris, collecting written assurances that one civil ceremony could convert illegitimate to legitimate with the sweep of a pen. She dissects case law late into the night, the yellow glow of her bedside lamp illuminating pages on Judith of Bavaria, the Carolingian empress who safeguarded her son Charles the Bald's inheritance by persuading Emperor Louis the Pious to rewrite an empire's succession. Antoinette copies Judith's tactics into her own notebook. Cultivate sympathy. Press the need for stability. Present a ready-made heir. If a medieval empress could bend dynastic law, a 20th century princess surely can recast the destinies of a mere 2 square kilometers of coastline. She studies Catherine de' Medici's court intrigues for further guidance, analyzing how the Florentine queen mother maneuvered rival houses with nothing but marriage contracts and timing. She also pores over Count Cavour's Secret Plombier, meeting with Napoleon III, noting how calculated alliances can redraw borders without firing a shot. Each historical episode becomes a blueprint. Achieve legitimacy first, confront opposition second, secure the crown last. Antoinette cannot risk direct confrontation with Rainier. She needs allies inside the palace and on the streets. She lunches with an aging senator whose ancestors once served Genoese doges, hinting that Monaco's prosperity demands a hereditary line teeming with toddlers, not nightclub anecdotes. She hosts concerts in the market square, lifting her youngest child onto her hip so fishermen and flower sellers grow attached to our little Monegasque prince. She tips musicians extravagant coins during Saint Devota festivities, forging goodwill every time a trumpet blares. Public affection is ammunition she intends to fire at the critical hour. Meanwhile, Rainier treats the succession as settled. Trumpet sound, and Charlene Wittstock, Olympic backstroker, born in Zimbabwe and raised on South African surf, steps onto the balcony in a gown of whisper-thin satin. Diamonds tremble on her veil, but the smile that should have set every flashbulb alight hovers uncertainly. Her eyes mist. Her shoulders tighten as if the dress weighs more than silk. Close friends, stationed just inside the ballroom doors, later admit they saw her lips move, shaping an apology no microphone caught. Cameras record a bride who looks as though she has peered past the confetti into a tunnel she isn't sure she can face. Within the week, a brief communique announces that Her Serene Highness is resting, under treatment for exhaustion. One word, but seasoned court reporters know its elastic meaning. Nerves, insomnia, perhaps an avalanche of doubts. Historians find echoes of Tsarina Alexandra, retreating behind palace drapes with Rasputin, while Russia's unrest grew louder outside. Different empire, same hush, women suddenly encumbered by crowns that pinch. Charlene reemerges after a discreet convalescence and throws herself into charitable work. Swimming clinics for children, patrol boats fighting the scourge of rhino poaching, fundraisers with Hollywood legends who once co-starred with her late mother-in-law Grace Kelly. Monaco applauds, yet attentive palace staff notice she slips away early from many state banquets, pleading migraines. Still, the next decade mostly glides along outwardly smooth. Twin heirs, Jacques and Gabriella, arrive. In 2014, Albert maintains his climate initiatives, and the Principality's casino lights keep spilling gold over the harbor. Early 2021, winter waves crash beneath empty hotel terraces. Pandemic travel curbs keep the super yacht set at bay. Against this unusual quiet, palace regulars register a larger absence. Charlene is gone. An official statement explains she is in South Africa. Her nasal passages ravaged by a severe infection contracted during a conservation mission. Doctors forbid flight until multiple surgeries knit fragile sinus tissue. Anyone who has felt cabin pressure agony knows the warning is real, but weeks grow into months, and Monaco wonders why a temporary stay is stretching toward the half-year mark. Inside those palace walls, barely 2 square kilometers wide, an unused suite feels cavernous. Albert continues weekly audiences, yet his stride from council chamber to grand staircase slows when staff mention mail addressed to his wife. Portrait sittings for National Day are rescheduled. The traditional balcony appearance lists him solo. Gossip columns speculate. Is the princess renegotiating her marriage vows from afar, nursing a broken heart, seeking the clarity of old coastal skies before deciding her future? Mid-June, coastal papers in KwaZulu-Natal print photographs supplied by Charlene's foundation. She stands beside dehorned rhinos, gauze pads still taped near her ear after a minor procedure. No tiara, no silk gloves, just khaki, sunburn. A genuine grin when a sedated bull stirs awake. Commentators wonder whether the wildlife sanctuary has become a refuge, far from ceremonial protocol and jewel box formality. Back in Monaco, nannies escort 6-year-old Jacques and Gabriella through gilded corridors, past portraits of stern Grimaldi ancestors. Each night they video call their mother, though no footage is ever shared. After the children sleep, a courtier finds Albert pacing his study, polishing spectacles already spotless. A stack of foreign papers, lead stories ringed in red ink, rests unopened on his desk. September arrives with the Monaco Yacht Show. Albert strolls the docks, greeting captains beneath an unreal glitter of hulls and chrome, but the space beside him remains conspicuously empty. Cameras capture the outline where Charlene usually stands, hand raised in practiced salute, Headlines begin describing an empty throne syndrome. The phrase sticks. October. Rumbling storms roll off Table Mountain as Charlene, thin but upright, boards a jet bound for Europe. At Nice Airport, she shields her face beneath a hood, weight loss accentuating her cheekbones. Within the hour, Monaco issues another notice. The princess, after her ordeal, will continue recovery at a private medical facility outside the principality. Exhaustion, the statement repeats, so impossibly broad it might cover physical rehabilitation, emotional depletion, or quiet negotiation. Press interest intensifies. Body language analysts pore over her first charity photo op upon discharge. Albert's palm resting lightly on her shoulder, her smile careful, eye contact brief. Some newspapers call it staging, others insist it signals reconciliation. Rumor surges, recedes, then surges again, much like the tide below the clifftop palace. Spring 2022. At last a bulletin reads, Her Serene Highness has rejoined her family within the palace. She begins with small steps, a private tea honoring the Speaker of Parliament, an afternoon cutting ribbon at a children's ward, a low-key appearance in the royal box during the Monte Carlo Masters. Observers zoom their lenses to confirm her engagement ring glints in the sun. Yet questions linger, and speculators study every embrace between spouses as though deciphering foreign code. Throughout this saga, historians draw parallels. They recall Elizabeth I and her enigmatic bond with Robert Dudley, never proven, forever impactful. They resurrect Juliana Force of New York's Whitney Museum, whose rumored affairs allegedly swayed art acquisitions. Charlene slips, willingly or not, into that tapestry of powerful women whose private lives become public riddles. Still, the undeniable facts remain slender. Visible distress on her 2011 wedding balcony, a medically documented sequence of sinus operations a decade later, an institutional stay labeled exhaustion. Everything else, financial arrangements, personal ultimatums, hidden despair, belongs to the realm of conjecture. In quieter moments, Charlene swims. Palace guards attest she leaves early for the Olympic-size pool beneath terraced gardens, gliding lane after lane in near darkness. Water, the element that once carried her to the Beijing final, is again her refuge. She surfaces, breath ragged, and remembers the snap of starting pistols, the straight-line certainty of 50 meters. Life in the palace seldom offers straight lines. Albert faces his own reflections. At trade summits or environmental forums, he fields polite inquiries about his wife's health, repeating that she is doing much better. The phrase becomes mantra, yet aides note his relief when she stands at his side during the 2022 National Day ceremonies, children perched proudly in front. Charlene, pale but poised, presses gloved fingers to her heart as the anthem concludes. Some watchers see renewed unity, others, a well-rehearsed tableau. Only the couple knows which interpretation is true. Grimaldi tax haven, financial secrecy. Dawn creeps over the French Riviera like someone dimming up the lights in a grand theater. The sky blushes pink, gulls glide low above bobbing superyachts, and the espresso machines of Monaco hiss to life, prepping fuel for chauffeurs and jewelers and hedge fund fixers who call 2 square kilometers of rock their playground. This little principality is smaller than New York's Central Park, yet for decades, the House of Grimaldi has sold the whole planet a crystal-bright postcard. Formula One engines screaming through narrow streets, charity balls glittering like couture galaxies, royal balconies that seem built for camera lenses. Stare too long, and you almost forget that behind the postcard sits a working palace, a government, and, most intriguing for our story, a very modern money machine. Back in the spring of 2024, when tulips nodded along Avenue de la Costa and tourists queued outside the Oceanographic Museum, an international team of reporters quietly flew in from Paris with laptops full of passwords and court orders. They were following a rumor older than cafe gossip, but juicier than any paparazzi scoop, that the Grimaldi family had quietly slipped 258 million euros, a neat $250 million, into an offshore maze where tax collectors dare not tread. The leak, they said, came from thousands of internal emails and bank ledgers, somewhere between a bored accountant with a conscience and an IT contractor annoyed at a missed bonus. The digital vault had cracked open. The reporters checked every number, every transfer code, every shell company address. What looked at first like a single secret bank account soon sprawled into a constellation of entities: a trust in the British Virgin Islands, a holding company in the Channel Islands, and yet another wrapper stashed in a Caribbean jurisdiction whose government happily sells P.O. boxes to anyone with enough zeros on the check. Picture Russian nesting dolls carved from teak, but instead of adorable folk art, you find legal jargon and nominee directors paid to sign paperwork they barely read. That was the hiding place. And at the heart of the labyrinth, drawing the map and holding the flashlight, stood one man, Claude Palermo. For years, Palermo was more than just the palace's finance administrator. He was its backstage stage manager. If a charity gala needed discreet funding, he wired it. If a Monaco real estate deal required a friendly shell company, he drafted the paperwork. Courtiers called him the croupier, half joking because he glided through mahogany corridors, the way casino staff sweep chips off a roulette table. Smooth, silent, almost graceful. But by late 2023, whispers grew louder that regulators elsewhere in Europe were nosing around Monegasque high rollers. The palace, allergic to scandal, sensed risk. In January 2024, it issued a 2-sentence communiqué thanking Palermo for years of devoted service and wishing him well in future endeavors. No fireworks, no gold watch, but insiders say that farewell handshake was clammy with panic. A spotlight was swinging their way, and they needed to rearrange the furniture before anyone saw the dust. You might ask, why does a ruling family in a famously low-tax micronation need offshore tricks at all? Monaco already levies zero income tax on residents, so aren't the locals swimming in legal loopholes? Yes and no. The princely household insists its wealth rests on real estate, tourism, and prudent investment, nothing to hide. Yet image is everything. If you are the face of a place that critics already label a luxury tax haven, you can't be caught playing the very game most governments condemn. A whiff of hypocrisy could trigger tough questions from Paris or Brussels. Is Monaco policing dirty money? Does Europe need stricter border checks? For the Grimaldis, keeping their nest egg invisible was less about dodging tax in their own backyard and more about shielding wealth from any external clawback, inheritance battles, or political bargaining chips. The urge to blur financial footprints is ancient. A century earlier, U.S. Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, steel magnate, art collector, public servant, perfected a dance in which industrial profits slipped into labyrinthine trusts until taxable income all but disappeared. Mellon treated taxes like haggling at a market stall. The starting price was negotiable. Edward Doheny, the oil tycoon behind America's infamous Teapot Dome scandal, went one better by stuffing cash envelopes into a cabinet secretary's coat pocket to score oil leases on public land. And on the eve of World War I, Germany's Hohenzollern dynasty disguised naval rearmament loans inside civilian infrastructure budgets. fooling creditors until dreadnoughts slid down the slipways. Different eras, same moral. Money that dives below deck gains the dark magic of invisibility. Back to Monaco. The investigative team sifted through electronic breadcrumbs and found wire transfers executed with near-surgical precision. One tranche hopped from a Monaco-registered holding company to the BVI Trust, then onward to a Singapore brokerage that split the pie into blue-chip equities, all in under 48 hours, crossing 11 jurisdictions. Anything that moved more than €5 million would trigger Europe-wide reporting rules. So Palermo made a game of dancing just below that line. 4.97 million, 4.93 million, again and again. On a compliance dashboard, those near misses lit up like pinball bumpers. Finally, a junior analyst flagged the pattern, and the coded alarm bells, terms like unusual activity, PEP proximity, politically exposed person, started ringing. The team also found a file labeled discretionary beneficiaries principals. No first names, no titles, just that cryptic word. When reporters asked the palace whether principals meant the sovereign prince and close relatives, a spokesman delivered a velvet, soft dodge about respecting traditional family privacy. Translation? Nice try, no comment. To grasp the girth of €258 million, think of it this way. Buy every apartment in 3 of Monaco's new sea view towers, those glass spheres in Larvado Beach. Then stock each underground garage with a limited edition hypercar. Or, if you prefer public policy math, that sum could fund the entire annual budget of an Eastern European microstate, from teachers' salaries to hospital lights. For the Grimaldis, it is insurance, an all-weather cushion. But parked offshore, it slips beyond the fiscal reach of countries where their business deals flourish, ducking tax that might otherwise pave roads or pay doctors. Critics shrug. The rich stash money, water is wet. Yet symbolism matters. The Grimaldi family is both monarchy and brand mascot. When they wave from a gilded balcony, they personify the state. When that same household adopts tactics condemned by global transparency advocates, it undercuts Monaco's repeated pledges to clean up its banking sector. Every time European officials negotiate information-sharing treaties, they point to Monaco's reforms as proof that paradise can polish itself. If the prince's own accounts rely on secrecy, what message does that send to run-of-the-mill billionaires hunting loopholes? Reputational fallout travels faster than spreadsheets. Private bankers field frantic calls from clients. Is the palace under investigation? Should we shift assets to Zurich? Compliance officers in London update due diligence questionnaires. Are you or anyone related connected to the Monaco royal family? Even high-end auction houses quietly tell bidders they must prove funds aren't tied to politically exposed persons, especially ones with chestnut-roofed palaces and views of the harbor. Princess Antoinette's secret coup attempt. The year is 1950, and fog from the Ligurian Sea drifts through Monaco's narrow streets as the principality braces for the end of Prince Louis II's long reign. In salons, everyone keeps one eye on the palace and one ear tuned to gossip, because a succession crisis sits coiled like a spring behind the palace's rose-colored facade. The heir apparent, 26-year-old Rainier, busies himself in Paris nightclubs and military reviews, certain his destiny is secure. But upstairs, in a suite that once belonged to their mother, his older sister, Princess Antoinette, moves chess pieces the rest of the family cannot yet see. Antoinette has always been quick to sense an opening. As a child, she discovered hidden passages, memorized servant schedules, and mastered the exact angle required to peer from her balcony into the throne room without being spotted. Back then, she believed the crown might one day sit on her own dark curls, because Louis II had produced no legitimate sons. The illusion shattered when a tutor explained Monaco's rule of male primogeniture. The first boy in the line, however late he arrived, would leap straight over her. That boy turned out to be Rainier. Overnight, the title she imagined as hers became something she could only watch across the dinner table. Resentment burrowed deep. During her 20s, Antoinette learned to camouflage that resentment beneath flawless court manners, cutting ribbons, hosting charity raffles, dazzling foreign envoys with quips in flawless French, Italian, and English. Yet every magazine photograph of handsome Prince Rainier sharpened the sting. To outsiders, she played the dutiful royal daughter. In private, she kept a ledger of every slight and every constitutional loophole. One evening at a polo match in Cap d'Ale, the princess meets Alexandre Athanase Nogues, a French Corsican race car driver and tennis star who smells of motor oil and sea salt. He is no aristocrat, which makes him deliciously free of diplomatic baggage. His teasing grin draws a laugh from Antoinette that startles even her. Court life rarely earns genuine laughter. Within weeks, they become lovers, slipping away to secluded coves and alpine chalets far from the photographers who circle Monte Carlo. By summer's end, their first child, Elizabeth Anne, is on the way. The palace tries to smother talk of the pregnancy, but Monaco is the size of a postage stamp. Secrets echo along every corridor. Antoinette's second child, Christian Louis, follows 2 years later, and a third, Christine Alix, will arrive in early 1951. All three are born outside wedlock, and that fact both threatens and fuels Antoinette's plan. If she can marry Alexandre before the old prince dies, her children can be legitimized retroactively under both Monegasque and French law, thrusting them directly into the succession line ahead of Rainier. Legitimization, after a later marriage, has precedent in Monaco's Civil Code of 1882, whose language remains pliable enough to serve her purpose. Antoinette and Alexandre seek discreet opinions from friendly notaries in Nice and Paris, collecting written assurances that one civil ceremony could convert illegitimate to legitimate with the sweep of a pen. She dissects case law late into the night, the yellow glow of her bedside lamp illuminating pages on Judith of Bavaria, the Carolingian empress who safeguarded her son Charles the Bald's inheritance by persuading Emperor Louis the Pious to rewrite an empire's succession. Antoinette copies Judith's tactics into her own notebook. Cultivate sympathy. Press the need for stability. Present a ready-made heir. If a medieval empress could bend dynastic law, a 20th century princess surely can recast the destinies of a mere 2 square kilometers of coastline. She studies Catherine de' Medici's court intrigues for further guidance, analyzing how the Florentine queen mother maneuvered rival houses with nothing but marriage contracts and timing. She also pores over Count Cavour's Secret Plombier, meeting with Napoleon III, noting how calculated alliances can redraw borders without firing a shot. Each historical episode becomes a blueprint. Achieve legitimacy first, confront opposition second, secure the crown last. Antoinette cannot risk direct confrontation with Rainier. She needs allies inside the palace and on the streets. She lunches with an aging senator whose ancestors once served Genoese doges, hinting that Monaco's prosperity demands a hereditary line teeming with toddlers, not nightclub anecdotes. She hosts concerts in the market square, lifting her youngest child onto her hips so fishermen and flower sellers grow attached to our little Monegasque prince. She tips musicians extravagant coins during Saint Devota festivities, forging goodwill every time a trumpet blares. Public affection is ammunition she intends to fire at the critical hour. Meanwhile, Rainier treats the succession as settled. He tours U.S. military bases as the soldier prince who resisted Vichy influence, posing for Life magazine beneath fighter plane wings. Foreign correspondents label him gallant, Europe's youngest sovereign in waiting. Rainier's focus is external, rescuing Monaco's depleted treasury, cueing fresh investors, scouting a glamorous bride who could boost tourism. He has no inkling that his path to the throne is narrowing with every lullaby Antoinette sings to her children. In January 1950, Louis II catches pneumonia. Doctors whisper, nurses hover, and the scent of camphor drifts beneath doors. Antoinette judges the hour ripe. She drafts a memorandum to her father requesting permission to marry Alexandra immediately, emphasizing that 3 native-born children will guarantee continuity the moment Louis closes his eyes. The document, if countersigned, could upend Monaco's history. Louis receives her plea, but hesitates. He adores his grandchildren, doting on them during secret palace visits. One of his aides, though, quietly reminds him that legitimizing them would sideline Rainier, the very grandson whose steady hand might coax Monaco away from French annexation. The old prince wrestles with affection and duty, then rules that the succession must stay untouched until Rainier marries and produces heirs of his own. Antoinette's memorandum returns unsigned. Denied by her father, she contemplates turning the battle outward. Over late-night brandies, trustworthy courtiers hear her muse about a press offensive, posed photographs of her children on palace terraces, interviews painting her as Monaco's maternal guardian. She imagines black and white newsreels of toddlers in sailor suits waving from the ramparts, the orchestra playing La Brabançonne, while townspeople cheer. Public sentiment, she believes, could override palace protocol and French reservations alike. Time undercuts her strategy. Rainier accelerates his own timetable, and palace advisors schedule his accession ceremony for just days after Louis's passing. On a damp April morning, the cathedral bells toll in mourning. By afternoon, they peal again to proclaim a new sovereign. With one modest, cash-strapped but impeccably timed coronation, Rainier becomes Rainier III, and Antoinette's crack in the door shrinks to a slit of light. Some palace scribes later claim she floated a last-ditch proposal for a regency council, with herself as president until Rainier could wed and father official heirs. Evidence for the offer survives only in a half-burned draft found among 1950 court minutes, her handwriting looping beneath the words, "Temporary stewardship for dynastic security." Whether she planned to deploy it or considered it a fallback remains an open question. Realpolitik intervenes. French diplomats notify Monaco's Senate that extended wrangling could justify Paris assuming protective authority under the Franco-Monegasque treaties. Rainier's new ministers, fearing their tiny state could vanish under a French tricolor, urge a swift family compromise. One cloud-shrouded night in August 1950, Antoinette, Rainier, their great-uncle Count Felix, the Archbishop of Monaco, and a single, sharp-eyed family attorney convene in a library lined with vellum chronicles. After 4 hours of hushed negotiation, they seal what archivists later dubbed the Night of the Silver Ledger. The outline: Antoinette will renounce any active claim for herself and her children. She will marry Alexandra privately. Within a year, she and her offspring will receive a generous annuity and retain princely titles without succession rights. In return, Rainier grants written assurances of lifelong security and public respect for his sister. No cameras record the handshake that ends the standoff. True to the pact, Antoinette weds Alexandra in Monaco's town hall on December 4th, 1951, with only immediate family and a sprinkling of discreet dignitaries present. Civil vows take 10 minutes. Blessing from the archbishop takes 5 more. Outside, curious locals spot her bouquet of white gardenias but never learn the dowry's full weight. Rumor suggests a coastal villa, a Paris apartment, and trust funds sizable enough to shelter all 3 children through adulthood. The ledger that lists the actual figures remains sealed in the palace archive, its lock turned by the same ivory key historians still search for. In the months that follow, European newspapers mention a small hitch in the Grimaldi line, then move on to juicier scandals. Antoinette withdraws to Villa La Vigie, a cliff-top mansion painted wedding cake white. There she raises Afghan hounds, rescues stray monkeys, and funds animal welfare campaigns. Some afternoons she can be seen schooling Elizabeth Ann in fencing or drilling Latin conjugations with Christian Louis. Visitors remark on her sharp humor, her refusal to surrender any title but the one dearest to her, Maman. Whenever conversation drifts toward the coup that never was, she deflects with a cryptic smile and asks a servant to pour more tea. Rainier, meanwhile, presses forward. He rewrites Monaco's constitution in 1952 to clarify male precedents and bar illegitimate children from the line, a move clearly aimed at closing the loophole his sister once tried to exploit. He woos Hollywood star Grace Kelly, marries her in a televised spectacle in April 1956, and welcomes Caroline, Albert, and Stephanie in rapid succession. Film reels of Grace's veil floating down the cathedral aisle eclipse any memory of Antoinette's thwarted designs. Tourism soars. Tax exile billionaires buy hillside plots and the casino tables jingle again. The dynasty appears secure, yet the episode refuses to die. Archivists nose through old telegrams and stumble upon half-erased names of Paris lawyers. Retained by HRHAN, financial ledgers show late-night limousine rentals billed to a private palace fund. A diary belonging to a junior chamberlain ends abruptly 3 days before Rainier's accession. The torn page rumored to describe frantic deliveries of confidential documents. Each scrap feeds historians' hunger for a smoking gun letter proving how close Antoinette came to dethroning her brother. Twitter threads occasionally erupt under titles like "The Sister Who Tried to Steal Monaco," but they recycle the same handful of anecdotes: the memorandum to Louis II, the aborted press leak, the sealed stipend. They omit, almost always, the constitutional clauses that might have allowed legitimization to succeed or the diplomatic cables in which French officials raised red flags. Scholars groan but retweets fly because the A would be palace coup sells better than a footnote on inheritance law. Academic conferences treat the near coup as a case study in soft power. One lecturer lists it beside Judith of Bavaria's maneuvering, Catherine de' Medici's matrimonial chess, and Cavour's Plombières Pact, arguing that in hereditary politics, the cradle outguns the sword. Others debate whether Antoinette's plan truly endangered the throne, noting that Louis II could simply have refused to sign any decree, as he ultimately did. The debate rages because the archive stays sealed and the principles are gone. Antoinette died in 2011 at 90, outliving Rainier by 6 years. Her funeral procession edges along the same palace square where guards once tightened window latches in case sympathizers stormed the halls. Mourners recount her eccentricities, convincing a local conductor to arrange a lullaby for harp and foghorn, sending Christmas hampers to every orphan in Nice, challenging high rollers at the casino to match her charitable donations euro for euro. The obituaries note her brief flirtation with dynastic politics in the careful language of courts everywhere. No one uses the word coup. Grace Kelly's secret Hollywood affairs picture. A warm Los Angeles night in the mid-1950s. spotlights crisscrossing the sky, convertibles growling up the palm-lined driveway of the Ambassador Hotel, and every flashbulb screaming one name, Grace Patricia Kelly. She is 26, eyes like blue ice catching every shard of neon, waist so tiny costume designers complain they have to remove seams just to lace her in. She has an Oscar in her purse, a tiara in her future, and, if you believe the murmurs floating through studio hallways, a love life complicated enough to make even the town's most seasoned gossip columnists reach for their bourbon. By dawn, she will step onto a plane bound for Monaco to announce the engagement that will transform her forever, from Hollywood darling to serene princess. But tonight the studio commissary still echoes with questions. Is her heart already spoken for by another leading man? And if so, how much scrambling will it take to scrub that inconvenient subplot from the greatest fairy tale romance of the 20th century? The man at the center of the chatter is none other than Cary Grant, tall, perpetually tanned, and blessed with that lazy baritone capable of melting tension faster than cognac. Grant and Kelly had shared on-screen chemistry in a hit thriller set against the very Riviera cliff roads she would soon call home. The rumor mill insisted their rapport did not end when the director yelled, "Cut." Extras whispered about late-night drives in Grant's convertible along Mulholland, the pair stopping at a lookout to count constellation after constellation until sunrise. Depending on who told the story, the romance either fizzled politely or grew so intense that friends worried a diamond from Prince Rainier would be politely returned with a thank you note. What everybody agreed on was that Kelly's phone line to Grant stayed warm far longer than studio publicists preferred, and publicists were paid to worry professionally. Grant was not the only name pinned up on the studio's gossip bulletin board. Kelly's perfectly composed demeanor had drawn admiring circles around her, like planets around a star. There were whispers of a quiet connection with a brooding method actor who found her serenity endlessly fascinating, rumors of hushed dinners with a song, and Dance Man, who sent bouquets big enough to drain a greenhouse, and even talk of a giggling flirtation with a newly minted British knight whose scripts always ended with sunset kisses. No one could prove any of these liaisons, yet each rumor added to the legend. They painted a portrait of a starlet who, contrary to her Ice Queen persona, felt everything vividly and wasn't afraid to reach out and grasp it, until the world demanded a princess who could never be seen reaching for anything except her prince's hand. When the engagement to Rainier III hit the wires, Hollywood sighed, a little in envy, a little in relief. For the studios, her marriage meant a graceful exit before contract disputes over family life and European residency could erupt. For gossip editors, it promised a lifetime of tiaras, but also a headache. How to reconcile Monaco's need for a spotless princess with the archives of potential scandal still rattling in filing cabinets marked confidential. The palace soon made its priorities clear. Couriers in crisp morning suits arrived at entertainment newsrooms, bearing polite requests, sometimes backed by firm reminders of advertising spend, that certain back issues stay out of circulation. The shorthand around copy desks became immediate. Take Grace, off page 3. Prince wants page turners, not skeletons. This kind of defensive choreography was hardly new. Centuries earlier, another royal wife, Marie Antoinette, had found her every move shadowed by talk of an intimate bond with the dashing Swedish nobleman Axel von Fersen. Whether that liaison was romantic or simply evergreen court gossip, French royals labored to control the narrative, terrified the Queen's personal name would taint the crown. Anyone who leafed through European history could see the parallels. When a woman's image underpins the mystique of a throne, rumors become political explosives. Marie Antoinette faced libelles, pamphlets, and salacious cartoons. Grace confronted trade papers, fan magazines, and syndicated radio chatter. Technologies changed. Stakes remained chillingly similar. Archivists quietly scanning old studio telegrams have occasionally stumbled across clues that suggest the palace's instincts were justified. A terse note from a talent agent mentions the client wanting personal correspondence from Carrie returned unread. A studio secretary's memo refers to a delicate situation with Miss Kelly's phone calls. Circuits must be diverted. These scraps do not prove a romance, but they hum with tension, hinting at strings being plucked so softly only insiders could hear. Somewhere in locked filing cabinets are likely bundles of letters. His ink, her perfume, whose disclosure could light up auction houses and tabloids in equal measure. For now, they remain uncatalogued, perhaps by design. Monaco's own press archives tell a quieter story. Columns lavishing praise on the princess-to-be, breathless reports profiling her serene poise, almost no mention of a past life, save for sanitized bullet points. Oscar winner, devoted daughter, ambassador for American elegance. Local editors knew precisely where the invisible lines lay. One printer recalls an entire page plate pulled at midnight because a visiting foreign correspondent tried slipping in a paragraph about Kelly's late-night Hollywood parties. The replacement page ran a story about Monaco's new flower market. Nobody inside the principality needed reminding that its tourism, its real estate boom, its very allure ran on the fairy dust swirling around the palace balcony. Looking back, the tactics mirror maneuvers used by other powerful families when passions threatened public standing. In America's Gilded Era, industrial titan Henry Flagler famously adored a woman named Rosa Vercellana. Whispers insisted their relationship produced a child flagged as ward instead of heir in company registers. Newspapers of the time yielded suspiciously few details, and historians suspect expensive velvet gloves smothered the facts until curiosity cooled. Years later, another prominent clan, the Delanos, confronted their own swirl of speculation linking a certain Franklin Hughes to discreet liaisons. Whenever rumors rose, so did philanthropic donations and patriotic speeches, pulling eyes away from bedroom windows. The blueprint repeats, wealth plus influence equals power to hush, but only if the silencing is swift and complete. Against that backdrop, the Kelly Grant saga feels utterly plausible and yet impossibly fragile. Evidence remains circumstantial. Anecdotes whispered on sound stages, second-hand recollections of reserved tables at chase-ins, a valet's memory of Grace slipping out a side door during a wrap party and returning 3 hours later with the scent of a different aftershave lingering in the air. Carrie's own autobiography dances around the summer they met, praising her Grace, lowercase, but dangling the tantalizing phrase, "We were very close." Close how? The sentence acts like a wardrobe door left ajar. You see darkness inside and feel wind from secrets swirling. Friends of Kelly later admitted she possessed a streak of rebel hunger, bristling at expectations that a respectable mainline girl remain sheltered. She understood contracts, public opinion, studio politics. She could play by rules, but her eyes sparked whenever someone talked about moonlit escapades or cross-country drives in borrowed cars. One still-living cameraman speaks of a night shoot on the Riviera when Grace and Carrie vanished between takes. The assistant director counting down for a shot while Grips pretended not to notice two silhouettes strolling away beyond the arc lamps. They returned just as dawn blushed the coast, faces glowing, dialogue perfect, professionalism unshaken. If that night later replayed inside palace walls as a dangerous memory, no one can prove it, but the shadows remain. After the royal wedding, suppression efforts turned more rigorous. Photographs from Kelly's Hollywood years were bought en masse by Monaco representatives. Some prints resurfaced decades later in estate sales, stamped with mysterious purchase orders and export permits. Library microfilm reels featuring juicy columns suddenly sported blank frames. One archivist joked that splicing scissors must have worked overtime. Even the brand new phenomenon of fan scrapbooks was not spared. Collectors received polite letters offering replacement photos more reflective of Her Serene Highness's current role. Flattery plus a signed postcard often sealed the deal, and the more compromising clippings found their way into fireplaces. Still, the digital age eventually crept up. Old rumors reheated on message boards, and social media threads tried to piece together timelines. Enthusiasts pored over flight manifests, mapping days when Cary Grant's London stopover coincided neatly with Princess Grace's private humanitarian engagements. But a scatterplot of coincidences does not equal proof, and screenshots rarely capture nuance. In the end, these posts generated heat without light. No love letters, no candid snapshots, no diary entries. The palace ignored them, confident that whispers without evidence flutter away like discarded ticket stubs after a premiere. Yet the mystique endures precisely because the rumors remain neither confirmed nor definitively debunked. Storytellers relish that liminal space where maybe still lives. We picture Grant alone in his Beverly Hills study, gazing at a photograph of Grace playing with palace puppies, wondering if he might have been one of them, frolicking on those terraces. We imagine Grace on a yacht in Mediterranean moonlight, hearing a distant American accent on the radio, and letting her mind drift for a heartbeat before duty snaps the daydream shut. In those imagined moments, both Hollywood and Monaco achieve an almost mythic orbit, twined by longing and royal protocol. 1911. Succession crisis manipulation. A century and change ago, long before superyachts blocked every horizon line in Monte Carlo's harbor, Monaco balanced on the thinnest of political blades, and almost nobody outside a tight knot of diplomats had any idea the principality was about to disappear in a puff of paperwork. Forget Formula One engines, casino glamour, or Grace Kelly's cinematic entrance. In 1911, the whole 2-square-kilometer realm faced a succession tangle so severe that France quietly prepared an annexation decree. Prussian generals salivated over having a friendly duke on the Mediterranean, and the Grimaldi dynasty, 7 centuries old, very nearly snapped in half. The episode goes by the dull label, the 1911 succession crisis, but insiders still call it the crisis that almost lost Monaco, because that's exactly what it was. The reigning monarch at the time, Prince Albert I, was a mild-mannered oceanographer who, like many early 20th century royals, spent more nights cataloging fish specimens than hosting state banquets. He had one legitimate child, Prince Louis, but Louis preferred Paris nightlife to dynastic duty, and crucially, had produced no legitimate heir. The next in line under Monaco's age-old statutes was Wilhelm, Duke of Urach, a tall, blue-eyed German who happened to be Albert's closest agnatic relative. Wilhelm was cultured, multilingual, and more than willing to swap cold Stuttgart winters for Riviera sunshine. To most neutral observers, he looked like the obvious successor. To France, locked in a tense pre-war stare down with the German Empire, he looked like a ticking bomb on the doorstep. French officials pulled dusty treatises off library shelves and reminded one another that back in 1860, Napoleon III had swallowed Savoy and Nice through the Plombières annexation deal, a diplomatic sleight of hand orchestrated by Cavour that redrew the map without firing a shot. History, they decided, could repeat itself in miniature. If Monaco permitted a German duke to mount the rock, Paris would simply absorb the territory for security reasons. The logic sounded eerily familiar to anyone who had studied Habsburg electoral bribes in the Holy Roman Empire or the Umayyad Caliphate's tribal pacts. When great powers feel threatened, they buy, bluff, or bully their way to safety. France chose bullying, but very, very quietly. While bureaucrats in the Quai d'Orsay sketched annexation drafts, Prince Louis was dancing at the Folies Bergère with a backstage chanteuse named Marie-Juliette Louvet. Their romance flickered between Montmartre nightclubs and seaside hideaways until, in 1898, Juliette gave birth to a daughter, Charlotte Louise Juliette Louvet. Charlotte was clever, mischievous, and adored her father. What she was not in any legal sense was legitimate. Under Monaco's statutes, that single detail kept her miles from the throne. Or so everyone thought, until desperate French ministers spotted an escape hatch, legitimize Charlotte, leapfrog the German duke, and keep Monaco safely francophone. Getting from brainstorm to royal decree required diplomatic surgery. First, Paris needed Prince Albert's blessing to shuffle succession rules midstream. He hesitated. Rewriting centuries-old protocols for a granddaughter born on the wrong side of the blanket felt risky. Paris responded with serene menace. In one sealed meeting, a French envoy slid a memorandum across Albert's desk that read, in essence, accept Charlotte or accept annexation. No sabers rattled, but French customs agents suddenly inspected every Monaco-bound freight wagon, and rumors spread that the French Navy had standing orders to secure the tiny harbor if Berlin so much as issued a protest note. Inside palace corridors, legal scholars pawed through code books for precedents, ultimately drafting two pivotal documents. The first was a special statute permitting a reigning sovereign to adopt an adult child and endow that child with dynastic rights. The second was a private ordinance legitimizing Charlotte retroactively through Louis's formal recognition. Both texts were modeled on earlier French laws that had legalized the Orleans line after the 1830 revolution. Proof that paper judiciously inked can reshape bloodlines faster than biology. The trick lay in timing. Publish both decrees before German diplomats realized what was happening, seal them with the prince's signet, and present the fait accompli to Europe. Wilhelm of Urach did not sit idle. The Duke dispatched legal representatives to Monaco, citing the 1882 succession treaty, which had been accepted by France and confirmed that the Grimaldi patrimony passed through male lines unless no males remained. He argued, correctly, that Charlotte's birth status rendered her ineligible. In calmer times, he might have prevailed, but 1911 was not calm. Newspapers buzzed with talk of Moroccan crises and Balkan powder kegs, and every headline convinced French strategists that letting a German control Monaco would be strategic lunacy. Wilhelm received polite letters, stalling for clarification while Paris finalized its pressure campaign. On April 2, 1911, Prince Albert signed the Adoption Act. 2 hours later, a second decree granted Charlotte full dynastic rank and styled her Her Serene Highness Princess Charlotte. The ink barely dried before the Monegasque government messaged Paris. Crisis resolved, annexation unnecessary. Public explanation? A routine modernization of house law? Private reality? A diplomatic elbow to Germany's ribs so forceful it left a bruise visible from Berlin. France's threat of annexation was never published, and archives covering the Quai d'Orsay's cable traffic for March-April 1911 remained sealed for decades. Only much later did historians connect muffled references in cabinet minutes to odd troop redeployments along the Riviera rail line. What is certain is that Monaco's parliament rubber stamped the new statutes without a whisper of debate, a silence that smelled strongly of outside pressure. Savoy's quiet session at Plombières, half a century earlier, had taught local politicians how quickly consultation could become a formality when Paris made up its mind. Rain swept the rock the night Charlotte arrived from Paris to attend her first court presentation. She was 12, still more at home climbing orchard walls than practicing curtsies, but she understood enough to sense tension swirling around her new title. Courtiers bowed extra deep, servants snapped heels a fraction too crisply, and her father Louis hugged her with a mixture of pride and apology. The girl had become a political shield. Everyone felt it. Nobody said it. Wilhelm's envoys watched from hotel terraces, scribbling telegrams that began, "The princess was greeted warmly by the populace," as if warmth could undo a rigged game. Reaction in Berlin came late and loud. German newspapers called the move a legal ambush, accusing France of meddling in a sovereign succession. The Reichstag debated sending a protest. Yet Kaiser Wilhelm II, juggling crises from Morocco to Alsace, decided one more confrontation was a bridge too far. Better, he concluded, to swallow the insult than risk continental war over a cliff-perched casino. With that shrug, Wilhelm of Urach's chances flatlined. Charlotte's path cleared. The crisis seemed settled, but one wrinkle remained. Charlotte was still an adolescent. If she died before giving Monaco a future heir, the dreaded German claim could reawaken. Paris needed a permanent seal, so discreet files labeled Matrimonial Prospects, HSH Princess Charlotte, appeared on desks across Europe. Veteran matchmakers suggested Hanoverian princes, Bourbon Two Sicilies cadets, and even a Scandinavian duke. Charlotte's own opinion barely registered. She was a living treaty clause, and treaties demanded signatures, not feelings. Before any engagement materialized, however, Monaco's internal politics erupted again. Economic downturn, rising unemployment, and the sense, shared by many Monegasques, that Paris had hijacked their destiny, sparked demonstrations in late 1911. Protesters marched beneath banners reading "Monaco for the Monegasques," shouting demands for a constitution limiting princely powers. Some agitators even peppered leaflets with rumors of French annexation plans, calling the new succession laws proof that the tiny state had become a French puppet. The demonstration spooked the palace badly enough that Albert conceded a constitution in January 1912, trimming his authority and placating the crowd. Ironically, the same French pressure that secured Charlotte's status also fueled the push to curtail her grandfather's absolutism. Through all this, the hush around annexation remained airtight. French newspapers praised Albert's modern reforms and hailed Charlotte as the principality's radiant future, but none mentioned the contingency orders drafted by the Ministry of War. Monaco's own gazette carried only the legal formalities, no commentary, no hint of menace. Modern social media threads sometimes dig up a stray telegram or speculate about troop schedules, yet they rarely supply concrete citations. The specifics lie buried in diplomatic bags, waiting for a patient historian to request declassification.